I rise tonight to speak about emergency unemployment compensation. We know by the acronyms around here, people refer to as unemployment insurance, UI, but what we're talking about here in the real world are literally millions of Americans affected in one way or another because they've been out of work, unemployed for long periods of time. By one estimate, the number of Americans who have been out of work for 6 months or longer, and many of these individuals have been out of work for a lot more than 6 months. But when you put that, you draw that line of 6 months or longer, it's more than 4 million Americans. So it's a big number, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Pennsylvania impact, and walk through some of those numbers. But this legislation that is finally coming together after many weeks is going to be, and I think must be, a bipartisan compromise. That's the only way to move forward. And it's an effort to provide an essential lifeline, and that's not an understatement, or not an overstatement. That might be an understatement. An essential lifeline to middle-class families who rely upon the program to stay afloat as they're actively seeking work. And I think that's sometimes lost in the discussion. These are folks that are trying to work, trying to find a job again. I would have preferred a much longer extension than the one that's been discussed and worked on. And I also would have hoped that people relying upon this type of compensation, emergency unemployment compensation, would not have to see their benefits lapse. Extending this program has always been bipartisan, and we need to make sure we keep it in that vein. While our economy has made substantial improvements, we've got a long way to go. Families are still hurting, and they need help. Unfortunately, when families read the business page of their local newspaper, there are a lot of numbers there that look pretty good. But if you're out of work for any period of time, but especially 6 months or longer, it doesn't really matter what's on the business page. It doesn't really matter what the overall national assessment is. For that individual, for his or her family, the economy is in very difficult shape because they're not working, they're not able to help their family. We know that in addition to being that lifeline for families, an essential connection to any kind of economic security, the other reason that it's important to have unemployment compensation, emergency unemployment compensation passed, is because of the economic boost it provides, the economic jump-starting impact of this program. Just by way of example, in 2012, Mark Zandi, one of our more respected economists on both sides of the aisle, found that for every dollar of emergency unemployment compensation, there was a $1.52 new economic impact or new economic activity resulted. So that's the old spend a buck, and what do you get for spending the buck? You spend a buck on this, you get $1.52 in return, a substantial return on that investment. Recent analyses specifically focusing on extension of benefits in 2014 have also found a large economic boost. The Economic Policy Institute has estimated that extending unemployment benefits in 2014 would generate $37.8 billion in economic activity. $37.8 billion. We know that this is an issue, unemployment or emergency unemployment or long-term, the issue of long-term unemployment varies depending on the state. But we know every state's been affected, and almost every community has been affected in a very substantial way. Here are some of the numbers for Pennsylvania. A big state, a diverse state, more than 12 million people, and in some ways tends to reflect broadly what's happening in various parts of the country. 73,300 people immediately stopped receiving unemployment benefits when emergency unemployment compensation expired on December the 28th, 2013. That's kind of the beginning of the current crisis for these families. They've been living through a very difficult economy for years now. They've been out of work for many, many months, and sometimes, in some cases, more than a year or two. But the current crisis started for them on December the 28th. Just can't even imagine what it's like. You're in the middle of the holiday season, or kind of the end of the holiday season. You're out of work. You've been robbed of your dignity. You've been robbed of your ability to contribute to your family's well-being. And on top of all that, in the middle of the holiday season, when it's supposed to be a time of hope and optimism and gift-giving and all kinds of family time, these families had a member of their family, or more than one member, lose their unemployment and emergency unemployment compensation. So that's where it started. But because the Congress didn't have a bipartisan consensus until recently, the days and the weeks started to add up. So when you go from December the 28th to March the 1st, we can take another look at the numbers. And unfortunately, and not surprisingly, those numbers went up. As of March the 1st, 105,000 Pennsylvanians have lost their benefits. But it gets worse than that. If it continues, and there's not some relief provided, through May, and this is the period that would be covered by the bill, it's estimated that 158,400 Pennsylvanians and some 2,795,300 Americans will have, I should say, lost their unemployment compensation and could benefit from this bill. So it's very simple in terms of the choice we have to make here. We either decide in the very near future, we hope starting this week and beginning the process to finally get this done, we're going to be deciding whether or not we help almost 2.8 million Americans and almost 160,000 Pennsylvanians or not. It's a very simple choice, and we're going to take either one path or the other. I believe and I hope and I pray that we take the path that helps those almost 3 million Americans and almost 160,000 Pennsylvanians. I mentioned before that the economic impact of passing this kind of legislation. We know that in Pennsylvania, for example, by one estimate, extending the benefits would provide a boost to consumption and economic activity that would save an estimated 15,000 jobs in Pennsylvania. So that's another way to measure the impact of this. So it's my hope that the Senate can swiftly pass this bipartisan legislation to extend emergency unemployment compensation, and that the House will take it up and pass it without delay. We can't allow politics to stand in the way of helping families in need. This is basic and fundamental. These families, these individuals have waited far, far too long. And Mr. President, I'll conclude with just one example. A couple of Sundays ago, maybe about 3 weeks ago now, in church on Sunday, I was walking out of the church in our neighborhood, and a woman came up to me, a woman I don't know, but I recognized her from the neighborhood. I just didn't know her name. She came up to me and she asked me about this issue. She said, "I'm out of work, and when do you think it will pass?" And she had asked me a couple of weeks before that, and I said, "I think we're getting to the point where there's a consensus." On that particular Sunday, just a couple of weeks ago, she asked me again. And when she started to ask the question, she asked it with a seriousness and an earnestness and a kind of worry in her voice that caught my attention. I said to her something like, "Well, I think we're starting to get there, but I can't say for sure when." And then when I gave that answer, she looked at me and she started to become very emotional. And she said, "Well, I hope you're reaching the point where you can pass something, because it's going to be very difficult for me to hang on any longer. This is very, very tough." And I felt at that moment, as an elected official, who was given power by the voters to vote and to represent them, I felt at that moment, if not powerless, I felt that I wasn't nearly doing enough for her, and that I was part of an institution that had not come together yet, here in the Senate and in the other body as well, that we haven't come together to answer her question with full confidence and to say, yes, we understand this, we understand what you're up against to the extent that we can, not having lived through this ourselves, but we're going to act this week, or we're going to act tomorrow, or the next day. And not having a specific answer for her gave me a sense of not just frustration, but a sense of failure. So because of that sense of urgency that she brought to my attention, but also I think every member here could probably tell a similar story. We have to act. We have to get this done. And we've got to make sure that we undertake every effort to make sure that in the next few days, and I hope we're talking days now, this will get done and we can finally provide a measure of relief, which is short-term, but it will have the effect of providing a measure of relief to families that have suffered in ways I can't even imagine.